So the Confederate flag controversy. I want you to think about the historical connections, but also the timing of it. This is going to be a really important debate that's still ongoing in a sense. It's still ongoing in a sense. On that first sheet, talking about semiotics. Semiotics. Semiotics is just basically a fancy word that talks about the study of signs or symbols. Study of signs or symbols. Now we understand signs and symbols. Right? On my way to Bowie State today, I was running late, all this ice on the ground and stuff. So I was probably driving a little too fast. When I got to campus, I saw an octagon-shaped sign right before I was able to pull into the parking lot. There's this octagon-shaped sign with some writing on it. What did I do when I came to that octagon, that red octagon? Stop! Even before I read it, I don't have to read it to know what that sign's about. It's a symbol of something, right? It's a symbol of something. We understand that in this society that means stop. If you don't stop, enforcement comes, or you may hit somebody, get hit, whatever. So we understand symbols and signs without the fancy language yet. Maybe the best example of a symbol or a sign might be a flag. We had this whole conversation about imagined community and nations and how significant they are, right? So, what's a flag? A flag is just a symbol of a nation, right? So you see it and you have some kind of attachment with it. You might think about how it's a sign for an imagined community, what have you. So we're going to use this discussion to work backwards and understand imagined community a little bit more. You could also use it to understand tipping point, I'll argue in a second. But that's basically what semiotics means, the study of signs and symbols. The study says that society invests those symbols with meaning. So they may not mean the same thing in different moments. We know what they mean because we're a part of the society. In a different country, stop signs look different, right? So let's think about this notion of the Confederate flag and what it might symbolize, maybe then and now. It's interesting, in part, when this discussion happens. When this discussion happens. It's kind of an interesting tipping point around this discussion or this debate. I'll get into that in a second. What I want you to do is understand the debate. I'm not going to sort of push you to understand this in any one way or another. I want you to think about this because it's really a complicated, in some ways, debate. Both sides feel like they're right about this debate, and in some ways they end up talking past each other. So we want to use tipping point and imagined community to try to understand the major parts of this debate. We'll go through the pro-Confederate flag side and the anti or con side. There's pro and con. There are those on the pro side that say, it's fine to have a Confederate flag flying. In particular, this became an issue in South Carolina. It's funny how they keep coming back to South Carolina as an example, but it really blew up in the early 1960s in South Carolina. Now think about what's happening in the country in the early 1960s. What's happening in the United States in the early 1960s? Civil rights era, right? So race is definitely on the forefront of people's minds. Some people think that's why this became an issue then, right? That was kind of a tipping point in a sense. 100 years after the kind of invention of the Confederacy, right? That symbol seemed to become prominent once again, right? Despite the fact that the Confederacy technically has been dead, right, for almost 100 years. So we can think about that. Now, what happens? South Carolina actually, has a version of the flag that flies on state buildings in the Capitol. Some people say that's a problem. Some people have said, wait a second, how are we going to have a Confederate flag flying on the state Capitol building in an American state? Many in South Carolina say this is our heritage, what have you. So you can't tell us what to do, kind of thing. But it really became an issue around flying on the state Capitol. Some people say you can do whatever you want in your home, but you can't have it on a government building or public places, these sorts of things. So think about these parts of the debate. Right, this handout, it kind of summarizes some of the pro and con arguments. I want to go through some of those really quickly. So pro-Confederate flag viewpoint. These are many of the popular arguments. Think about which ones you may agree or disagree with. Supporters take the position that there is nothing wrong with displaying the Confederate flag in public places or on government buildings. Their arguments include, say, look, the flag is just a symbol. Right? We invested with meaning, so why are you going to attack the symbol? Has no intrinsic meaning. Right? Study of semiotics says all flags are symbols. So are you going to get rid of all flags if you don't like, something in that country, that nation? Some that are in favor of the Confederate flag say, look, if you ban the Confederate flag, don't you have to ban the American flag too? If some that are offended by the Confederate flag, right? Some say, look, the Confederate flag stood for slavery, white supremacy, discrimination. Groups like the Klan adopt it, right? They use it as their symbol. So others say, well, wait a second. Slavery was a legal institution, right? So if that's the case, don't you have to ban the American flag that legalized it? Don't you have to ban the government benefited from slavery? Why are you just going to ban the Confederate one, they might say? If you're going to ban it, ban all flags. And the American one too. This is a popular argument. Others say that the Confederate flag reflects Southern heritage and tradition. Right? This idea of diversity, regional pride, identity, especially Southern identity. Southerners quite often have felt oppressed by the North and the outside forces, especially the federal government. Right? This notion of states' rights comes into the discussion. Many say that the Confederate flag is a way to memorialize those that died in the Civil War on the Confederate side. South Carolina, in particular, lost about 20,000 people in the Civil War. Very bloody for that particular state. They say, look, this is the way we remember that contribution. Right? Those soldiers that were fighting for what they believed in, right? They believed that they were just as patriotic as George Washington, who fought against federal power, right? Fought for individual rights and such. That's how they would view it. So especially on Confederate battlefield commemorations or cemeteries, we say that, right? You might see Confederate flags. I went to the Confederate Flag Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. Big one in Virginia. This is one of the pro arguments. Again, think about what you think about the strengths or weaknesses of these arguments. Confederate flag is a celebration of nonconformity and rebelliousness. I'll go through some of these quickly, and we can come back and talk about them a little more. Political debate: states' rights or individual right versus federal power. Right? Americans pride themselves on individual rights. Like the whole Bill of Rights is about freedom of speech, freedom of press, all that kind of stuff. Right? This constitutional debate: people burn the flag. That's seen as protected in many cases. Freedom of speech, even though a lot of folks don't like it, right? Get you in trouble doing it, but technically it's protected as free speech, despite the fact that folks don't like it. Many folks don't like it, I should say. This gets really sticky in a democracy, right? We start thinking about free speech and protecting free speech on one hand, and then people that don't like certain things, right? Is that free speech something you agree with or not? It's really sticky. Let's summarize the anti-position, and then we'll talk about that. Anti-Confederate flag viewpoint. Supporters take the position that there is something wrong with displaying the Confederate flag, especially in public places and on government buildings. Some folks say, okay, do what you want in your house, I ain't got to go visit you, but you cannot do this on a state building. This was a symbol of another nation that broke away, fought a war, committed treason, they might say. How are you going to put that flag then on an American building? They say that the Confederate flag is not merely a valueless symbol. It was a symbol of a nation that committed treason against the U.S. And this study of semiotics is interesting. When you think about other parallels, come back to that Nazi flag perhaps. Venerating the Confederate flag constitutes a lack of patriotism, they might say. Disrespects Union soldiers that fought and maybe gave their lives as well. Confederate flag conjures up a legacy of racism or white supremacy. This is a big one. A lot of folks say, look, this was it's an offensive symbol. some might say, especially within the African American population. Many say, look, it was a symbol of slavery. We need to get rid of that. It's especially offensive and divisive. What else? This constitutional debate is interesting, right? The free speech argument is actually a big argument on the pro side, deciding that freedom of speech is protected. Yet on the anti side, many say, look, we don't have freedom of speech for everything. Right? There are limits to freedom of speech. The famous example is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You yell fire in a crowded theater. This became a pretty famous court case. Because people get trampled, people can die, you can be charged with a crime. Inciting a riot, right? Angry in public, these sorts of things. So there are certain types of freedom of speech that we don't allow. Or say you go to the airport, right? You get on a plane, you go to DWI today. If I go to DWI today, I'm gonna fly out to LA and I see my friend Jack on the back of the plane. My friend Jack is all the way up the front, he's all the way to the back. If I stand up, start yelling, "Hi, Jack! Hi, Jack!" and acting erratic, what's going to happen? I'm going to get tackled. Right? If you start yelling, "Hi, Jack," there are certain things you don't do in certain situations. So they might say, yeah, be careful with the freedom of speech argument. Also, it's interesting that, again, the tipping point, right? When does this become an issue? Not necessarily in the 1860s when the Confederacy ends, but it's in the 1960s and 1950s when civil rights seems to be causing a major tipping point in this country. The Klan has adopted this symbol. Aryan nations, skinhead organizations adopt this symbol, and so have used it as their symbol, right, to show what they believe in a sense. Again, others on the pro side say, look, we can't stop people from adopting the symbol. Right? You can't. It's not the symbol's fault. So again, the argument gets really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. I want you to think about some aspects of this argument. Go through a couple of these images real quick and see what you think. We can talk about them. There are different versions of the flag. It says a nice color picture of the Confederate flag. The flag on the left is the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. The flag on the right is the Confederate national flag. And there are several different versions depending on how many Confederate states there were at the time. You'll see different versions of it throughout. This is generally the one that we see. There's a cartoon I think is interesting, right? It's two guys standing there. This guy is wearing it on his shirt. He says, "My people died because of this flag." And then this guy looks African American, says, "So did mine." Right, so in some ways, maybe it's a question of perspective, right? Both feel like, yeah, there's heritage is at stake here. This idea of memory, historical memory, but it's a very different memory. It's another image I pulled offline. Some folks say, look, it's just like the Nazi flag in Germany. It's a really interesting argument, especially around the Nazi flag, and around this idea of symbols. I mean, the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party in Germany, right, doing all kinds of things around race and discrimination, killing people, right? How do you feel about 12 million, 13 million civilians, including 6 million people of Jewish descent, but others as well? Part of World War II, bloodiest war in history, around that symbol, right? So the German government has essentially banned that symbol. Some people say, oh, you know what, you can't do that. Thinking especially about the symbol itself. The swastika itself is actually a much older symbol than its use in Germany. Some folks have documented that symbol, that version of a star essentially, as having kind of religious significance going back a couple thousand years. Indian religious practices that it meant peace. Now the Nazis take it, put it on a flag, right? It means something very different, right? But some folks say, well, wait, you can't ban that symbol, though. I'm going to ban that symbol 2,000 years worth of history because of this, Adolf Hitler and his folks that took it, 80 years ago, and made it what it becomes. Interesting point. So is there a difference? I'll leave that up to you to think about. Again, a number of folks have used the flag. We have some sort of Klan type group using it, right? The Klan is an interesting organization in terms of its use of symbols that they feel are symbols of hate or racial supremacy. The initial Klan that formed in 1867 kind of dies out after a while, and actually the Klan would be reborn around 1915 in the North this time. The Klan is reborn in Indiana in 1915 and becomes this big, major organization in American history. In the 1920s, they had somewhere between 2 and 4 million members. In 1925, the Klan had a major march here in D.C. Marches down Pennsylvania Avenue. These famous pictures with the Klan marching in the White House in the background. They would use this symbol to, again, essentially try to offend people. There's a famous story, though. The Klan, the second Klan that gets reborn, really hates everybody. First Klan, we know them for hating African Americans and hating Northern Republicans that come south. The second Klan that's reborn in 1915, they're kind of equal opportunity haters. They hate everybody for one reason or another. They hate Jews, Catholic folks, they hate black folks, Latinos, they hate Asians, people in the Middle East, Catholics, I didn't say that. They hate everybody. They got a problem with everybody. So it's interesting that they would use this. What happens in a famous case in the 1960s? The Klan comes to a town and they're seeking a permit to march. They're seeking a legal permit so that they can march through this town. The town is like, oh heck no, we need no permit to march through here. It's crazy. No, you can't have it. Klan is like, look, it's our freedom of speech. This is America. There's a prominent Jewish lawyer decides to take the case for the Klan. He says, we have to defend their freedom of speech. Even though he disagreed, obviously, with their views, the Klan would have hated him in any other situation. He says, I got to take the case. He says, our justice system is so important that if we don't defend freedom of speech everywhere, it's a threat to all of our rights, everyone's rights. His colleagues were like, what are you doing? It's the Klan. Once you win the case, they don't kill you. They don't like you. They don't respect you. Why would you fight for their rights? He says it's not about that. It's about democracy, the justice system for all. Gives them their permit and they have their march. Interesting. Think about, that he said freedom of speech was so important that he was willing to fight for them. Right? How various folks might use this symbol. Here's another one I think is interesting. What about this use of the Confederate flag? You know, think about young ladies, look like they're going to Boots Day homecoming right there. That's new gear. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think about this usage? What do you think it says? What are your impressions? No right or wrong answers. Just interested in your thoughts. Try to flip it. Interesting. Yeah, some folks say, look, I'm not going to, especially if you're from the South. Right? Most African Americans are from the South. Most of American history. You might say, look, I'm not abandoning my Southern heritage just because folks have used this symbol in this way. And some prominent hip-hop artists have done this. Kanye West got some controversy around using the Confederate flag. Lil Jon, the East Side Boys. Others have taken it and maybe changed the colors on it. Red, black, and green, for one instance. Can symbols be reused? We can have this discussion again later when we talk about the use of the N-word, right? Initially intended as something offensive, derogatory. The African Americans, many say, look, we've taken that symbol and reworked it. Now it's ours. You can't call me that, but you can call my homies that. Interesting discussion. Interesting discussion. Here's an example on the South Carolina State House, right? Actually flying. Now, flags are interesting, right? You're supposed to do, there's a certain protocol around the use of flags. You're not supposed to have any flag above the American flag, but you can have state flags or local flags or other flags. So it's interesting to do that. If you had it above it, and that might be a sign of some sort of revolution, essentially. But it is interesting to think about the kind of symbolism of flags in that sense. Now, the NAACP launched a major boycott. They said, look, until South Carolina stops using this flag, we're calling on everyone to boycott the state. Don't have any kind of conventions there. Don't take no vacation there. We're going to hit it in their pocketbook. If you want to offend millions of people, then we're going to keep our money at home. This is a major sort of back and forth. I'll show you something on this next time. South Carolina in particular has been the catalyst. This is just something I pulled off from the put buckwheat on there. A lot of folks say, look, it's about identity, right? Especially Southern identity, a kind of working class identity, the sort of redneck identity, right? Has been kind of reclaimed by many. Blue collar comedy tour, right? This notion of, yeah, we're just working class white folks. It's not about race. It's not about racism. And I think many folks, that might be true for many folks. I think there, it could be a number of individual interpretations of this. Now, when I see flags, I have my own experiences, so I may feel a certain way about it. That doesn't mean that's the only way to interpret this. I grew up in Southern California. When you saw the Confederate flag in San Diego, you knew you needed to be careful. Right? Where I grew up, there was for about 15, 20 minutes from this large Aryan Nation organization out there that was pretty prominent in the late 80s, early 90s. One time when I was a little kid, I was playing Top Warner football. I was back until it was good. And I'm like 8 years old. And I was playing out in the city in San Diego called Santee, California. It was kind of rural. We had a stereotype of Santee. There was a lot of Klan activity out there. So its nickname was Klan-tee rather than Santee. I was playing football. I remember being thankful because my mother didn't come to this game. She came to most of my games, but she didn't come to this game. I'm playing, running around with my thing, 8 years old, thinking I'm about to do something. And running over people, it was crazy. And all of a sudden I looked over and there were about 15 Klan members there on the sidelines. I'm 8 years old, only black kid on the team. I'm moving. I think I said it first. I just remember thinking, I'm glad my mom's not here because she would have got a couple of them. My mom was about this big, she would have got a couple of them. So I'm just like, I don't know if these guys are going to get me or what. You hear stuff happening. Coaches call timeout, came over like, hey, say, kind of, you see what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, I see. They're like, we're not going to let them get you on your ride home. Don't worry about it. I was like, cool. I can't drive. I'm 8. They just stood there for a while. They had Confederate flags and stood there staring at me. Then they left. I guess they just wanted to scare me or something. I don't know. So in San Diego, it meant certain things, right? When you saw flags, it meant certain things. It don't mean that everywhere, right? Driving across country when I moved here to D.C., I noticed a bunch of Confederate flags in Arizona, and I was driving. And I'm like, what is this? Like, it's nowhere near the South. It's Arizona, 2,000 miles away. There was a bunch of flags in Virginia, a whole bunch of flags in Tennessee. For some reason, I got weird vibes in Tennessee, too. Folks didn't seem like they wanted me around. I just drove quickly. First drove to Pennsylvania. I lived in Pittsburgh for 9 years. I noticed when I got to Pittsburgh, I saw Confederate flags. I was like, wait a second. Pennsylvania, that's the home of the Gettysburg, right? That's a strong Union. Why would you see Confederate flags there? That was, these folks lost. Their grandparents lost lives, too, fighting against the Confederacy. I'm wondering, why is this the case? First apartment I lived in, parked my car next to a lady, big Confederate flag in the car. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm trying to make sure I don't hit her car. I just parked below my house. Lady hops out of the car. I'm like, oh. I'm like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, good. Suspicious, right? Nicest lady you ever want to meet. If I show you around, you need to know where the main office is, and I show you around. I was like, no, thank you. I don't trust you. Didn't mean that to her. Didn't mean a racial thing. I asked a lot of my students in Pittsburgh about it because I would see a lot. And that would surprise me because it was in the north. Right? They were like, nah, we just think of it as a symbol of rebellion, a symbol of youth and blah, 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 stage rights, these kind of things. For some folks, maybe it doesn't mean that. Right? Maybe it doesn't mean that. So it's a complicated discussion. The point is, it's a complicated discussion. I don't think you need to come to any conclusions right now. We can talk more about this, but I want you to think about some of the strongest arguments for and against. Right? Some of the strongest arguments for and against. And think what you think about it. What do you think about it? What I'm doing is I'm going to put up a discussion board on Blackboard so we can talk about this a little bit more.